This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 504, featuring Mark C. Crowley, speaker and author of best-selling books, The Power of Employee Well-Being and Lead from the Heart. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vasilopoulos, founder of Rati Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And you know all about us. You can find 503 episodes in our catalog at theleadershippodcast.com. And this episode, like so many others, is proudly sponsored by Darley, trusted by warfighters and firefighters since 1908. Darley's dedicated to equipping our military and first responders with the essential tools they need for mission success, from fuel and firefighting pumps to drones and tactical solutions. You can learn more about this incredible company and their people who serve our nation at darley.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
Yes, and today we are honored to have a guest with us again. We were talking before the show, and it's been a while. It's been like 7-8 years since Mark was with us the first time around. It seems like it was yesterday. But today we're welcoming Mark Crowley to the show. Mark, welcome to the show.
Nice to be back. It is stunning how fast time goes, though.
Yeah, it's crazy. For those of you who don't remember that episode 7 years ago or so, he's the author of Lead from the Heart, Transformational Leadership for the 21st Century, taught in 11 universities. His new book is The Power of Employee Well-Being, Move Beyond Engagement to Build Flourishing Teams. So we're really excited to hear about things today and your research and what you've been doing since we last spoke and just catching up on things. But before we get there, what's something that's not in the public bio? Something that, people aren't going to find out about a public figure like you online?
Like my prison sentences.
Yeah.
You know, wow. Something that people don't know about me. I'm kind of an open book, interestingly. I try to expose myself so that people understand where I'm coming from, but I think this is sort of minor, but I read at least a book a week and have for the last 25 years. So I'm dedicated to learning, and I think that's sort of very much aligned with everything that I talk about as well.
Yeah. That's a common theme we've seen with, most of the leaders we speak with is like they read a lot, they learn a lot. Let's get into this because I'm really curious as you kind of, reached out and said like, oh, I've got this new book and, it's about these magical words, employee engagement, and your take on that, which I think is really interesting because we've been chasing that demon for a decade and, with like, oh my gosh, we're, employee engagement is the holy grail. And, people are coming up with gamification approaches and all kinds of ways for us to go after. This is how you engage people. And we've got to engage them with games or systems. And, I think a decade plus later, it's like, yeah, that didn't work. The employee engagement hasn't gotten any better. What did we misunderstand? How did we get deceived? Help us understand the problem before we get to what you believe is the solution.
Interestingly, I was involved with it. So I'll tell you a story. So when I wrote Lead from the Heart, and I wrote a second edition a couple of years ago and told the story that I wasn't able to tell in the first edition, which is that a woman that I paid $10,000 to help me build a platform because I had no social media exposure and I'm coming out, senior leadership role at corporations. Nobody knows who I am. So my speaking agent said, you need to have somebody help you. So because it's expensive, but she's going to be helpful. So I said, all right. So I gave her the money and she came back and she goes, we're not going to do anything about social media here. You have a bigger problem. And I said, well, what's that? And she goes, well, you're going to fucking fail if you continue to use the expression lead from the heart. So I said, well, did you cash the check? Because, you're not giving me what I wanted. And now you're telling me that my whole premise is flawed, which is your premise isn't flawed. She goes, the world just isn't ready for it. And it was the first exposure that I had to the idea. So I called it lead from the heart because there's science that shows that the heart and mind are connected. And all we are in business is rational. And I'm saying, no, we have to use two forms of intelligence because the people you're managing are, whether they realize it or not. So I was very comfortable calling it, but people understood it as soft, weak, sentimental, bullshit leadership and dismissed it. So once I realized I'm going to be playing this long game and trying to win people over, I decided, okay, I'm going to start writing articles. And over time, people will see that I'm not insane, that I actually know what I'm talking about. So I started writing for Fast Company. So in 2012 or 13, I reached out to Gallup. And I don't know why they even took my call, but I ended up talking to Jim Harger, who's the head of research there. And I said, hey, do you guys have any new research that shows that people are pretty miserable? Because my thesis is that we're managing people incorrectly. We're misaligned to human nature. So I'm thinking there's got to be some. And he goes, well, we're just about to publish this major study about the American workplace. And he starts to tell me that we figured out that only 30% of Americans are engaged at work. And I took it like everybody else did. I'm like, Mayday, Mayday, the world's coming to an end here. And boy, what potential we have if we can turn this around. So I've worked with him. Jim helped me with my second edition. He and I have written 3 or 4 articles together since then. So I have this wonderful relationship with them. But about a little over a year ago, I get this email from Gallup and it says, engagement is at a 10-year low. And I'm like, wow, I thought it was getting better. So I look at it and the numbers are the exact same as they were when I wrote this article. But by the way, he gave me permission to use the data before they published it. So I'm the first one in the world to go out and say, this is a huge problem. And I'm looking at this and I instantaneously just said, we've made a mistake here. If we're 13 years out and we've made no improvement. So I started off by going out to Twitter and I said, hey, if you had to pick one reason why engagement didn't work, what was it? And principally, everybody came back with the same thing. The CEOs never took it seriously. Wall Street never took it seriously. And so it's always just been performative. And then we do 1 survey a year, 2 surveys a year. And by the time the data gets out there, it's late. And people are like, that happened back in January. That's not relevant. And there was never any accountability. So I wrote a new article about a year ago in Fast Company, just said, it's time we stop thinking about this. Let's stop talking about it because no one's ever been held accountable. We're not really taking it seriously. People are annoyed by the surveys because they pour their heart into them and nothing ever gets done. And so I'll stop there, but basically just made the statement that it's time to stop talking about employee engagement because we never really took it seriously. We're not going to take it seriously. And as a lead up to my new book, it's too cumbersome with the 12 questions.
Yeah. Mark, so let me ask you this. Engagement, commitment, well-being. What part is an employer's responsibility and what part is an individual's responsibility for their own well-being, engagement, purpose, meaning, all of those things? I mean,
It's a very, very good question. I'm going to say it's sort of this both and kind of an answer.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I would say is that if you're talking about wellness, if you're talking about your personal health, your mental health, your physical health, exercise, diet, sleep, those kinds of things are on you. And purpose, understanding what it is you were born to do and what your talents are, those kinds of aspects, I think, are principally on us individually. But if the job of leadership is to help people perform optimally and to produce at the levels that the organizations are expecting, then I think it's almost 100% the responsibility of leaders to figure out what is it that influences people. And we now know there's major science that proves there's a direct correlation to how people feel at work, which was my original premise with Lead from the Heart. Feelings and emotions drive behavior. So if we ask people how they're feeling, and if people are feeling supported and trusted and growing and appreciated and integral, they're going to naturally, instinctively reciprocate and produce at levels that most leaders have never seen.
Mark, let me ask a kind of a crass question.
Go ahead.
A little bit. Nobody hires anybody just because they want to create jobs. They hire somebody because they say, if I hire you to do this, I'm going to get a return on that investment. I'll pay you $100,000 a year and I'll get $500,000 worth of value. It's kind of like you wonder, the crass thing you hear a boss say is, I shouldn't have to thank you for you should thank me that you've got a job. Are we getting back to that a little bit? Like, because the loyalty's gone and all that it is a transaction in a lot of ways. Yes, it's human relationships, but also, I mean, it's about money and it's about, I'm going to give you money and I want a return. And you've got to be an autonomous person that understands you have to produce more value than you cost. I mean, are we moving to that? And that's why we remain so frustrated with engagement, that we haven't acknowledged that in lots of places it's transaction.
If I'm understanding you, I think that work has very much become more transactional, and that's a leadership problem. But
Yeah.
it's interesting, right? So it's interesting because when people come in and they go, hey, just want to let you know I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice, the same bosses and organizations that have treated people transactionally resent it and say, what are you talking about? Why would you be leaving? And the interesting thing is, and this was research that I found from the conference board 15 years ago that has been upheld over and over and over, that if you look at the 5 greatest drivers of engagement, like people's true commitment, pay never ranks any higher than 5th anywhere around the world. So if we just assume that I'm going to pay you 100 grand, you're going to make me $500,000, good luck with that. Because once people negotiate their compensation, once they understand what the pay plans are and so forth, that stops being a day-to-day motivator. So if leaders understand that pay doesn't motivate once you've made the deal, then you've got to figure out what are the other 4 drivers and how do you support those drivers. And really, the overarching one, if you just focus on any of them, I've come to find through, the last 15 years of research, is just well-being. It's simply how do people feel day to day in their jobs.
Yeah, I want to take a deeper dive into kind of the definition of well-being. Because I think Jan touched on something earlier, which is like, hey, well-being more at a personal level, which, hey, your health and your happiness at home, et cetera. But, when we talk about, let's say, employee well-being, like what's the part of that, you know, we need to be mindful of as leaders, as managers, and help us define it, because I don't want to talk about it and have everyone kind of like think about like, oh, this is how I define it. Like, how do you define it?
So I'll say how I define it, but I'll also say that one of the interesting studies that was done out of Oxford, they just asked people at the end of the week. So they gave them 5 emojis: bright green, light green, orange, red, and bright red. So very happy, very unhappy, right? Or you can calibrate it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 if you want to do it numerically. Either way. And what they were able to distinguish was that people could say, my well being in the context of work. If I'm going through a divorce, that doesn't play into my grade here. If my kid's struggling in school, that doesn't have anything to do with this. So it's well being in the context of how do I feel when I come to work? How do I feel during my daily experience at work? So as companies have sort of moved away, they never really made a sincere, very few companies made a sincere effort at engagement, but it's always been sort of this cumbersome thing. And you ask them 12 questions and then, the people are like, oh, you're going to do a survey. So ask them how they like the parking and tell them, if do they like Pizza Tuesdays? And now all of a sudden you're getting 500 pieces of data and it's too well complicated. And so they started to see that mental health costs were increasing in companies and the burnout was high when they were asking people. And so what they did, what we've done, is always been this superficial fix. We've said, let's focus on wellness. And wellness is
Mhm.
not well-being. So wellness is, hey, you saying you're not getting enough sleep? Well, we're going to give you a meditation app, or we're going to give you a free yoga class. All of this is just a Band-Aid. And so what it really comes down to is that there are certain drivers of well-being which people understand themselves. One is just, do I have a boss that cares about me, that knows who I am outside of work and that matters to them? Like, that's a big deal. And, going back to Jan's comments, historically, it's like, hey, man, I'm paying you. You do a good job. I'll give you a little bonus. If you don't, I'm going to find somebody else. That's traditional leadership theory. Well, that's not what people want. People want to come to work and they want to know I work for you. You care about me. You know about me. You know what my responsibilities are at work. You know what my ambitions are and my goals. And to the extent that you can help support them, you will do that. So that's a critical component of it. That's a leadership thing. But the interesting thing for me, which was mind blowing, is that the number one driver of well-being is belonging. And so it's sort of amplified in my mind after COVID because everybody had a year away. And we sort of tricked ourselves into believing, like, at the beginning, it was like, oh my God, are we going to survive this? Are we all going to die? And then we went to, hey, we've lasted for a month. And then we get 6 months, 9 months, and a year. And we all sort of came out of it going, I did pretty well. Like, you know what? I kind of navigated this. We had some weirdness there, but man, I'm having more dinners with my family and we're sort of patting ourselves on the back. And what we've lost sight of is that the most important thing for human survival and happiness and well-being is a sense of connection with other people. And it was interesting because people started telling me when we came out of COVID and we were going back to the office, it's like, I don't want to go back to the office. I don't need any of that. I got friends at home. I got my neighbors. And I'm like, I wrote an article saying that's unsustainable because it's these micro connections that we have. It's how do you feel about working with the people that you work with every day? Do they respect you? All the different religions that people have, the way they dress, where they're from, Louisville, San Diego, Denver, Kuwait, we have to welcome all these people. And that's a sense of belonging. And we've never really thought it was important. So if we go back to Jan's remark, which is it's all about pay, and people come into work and they're like, I don't really feel respected by the people I work with, and I don't really work with them, and I don't trust that guy. The belonging is blown up. And so you cannot have well-being unless you have that. So these are two behavioral things. You've read the book, but in it, I'm calling it out and saying, you never really thought your job as a leader was to build social connection, but you must, because people are only, we spend so much of our time there that if you don't build it, they're really not going to get it. Nobody can thrive without it. But the interesting thing is that highly cohesive teams, this is evidenced by all kinds of research, the highest performing teams are the ones where everybody has each other's back, where belonging is like essential, where everybody understands it. Don't come here. Don't be a part of this unless you want to be a part of something bigger. If you just want to be the star, if you just want to be the lone wolf out there scoring all the shots, never playing defense, never passing the ball to anybody else, this isn't the place for you. My entire life experience proved that. The tighter people are, the more people feel like I can be who I am. This is one of the greatest needs for humans, but it's also the greatest driver of well-being.
Yeah, I can't help but think, especially as you bring up the pandemic, I think for someone to be a leader in person, in close proximity and contact with people, and to be able to have the kind of the casual conversations that happen through serendipity, it's easier to do that. And, post COVID, where working remote is still common, I don't think that genie's ever going back in the bottle. I don't think we're ever going to get to, you know, 5 days a week in the workplace for many jobs. I think that kind of connection is more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it requires a more skillful leader. It requires a more intentional leader, I think.
Correct.
And
100%.
what I'm curious about, though, is at the same time we're doing that, we all have this need to demonstrate our worth and our value. And so a lot of people, when they're remote, do that by like having a packed calendar because people can look on Teams and see like your calendar's not full. So maybe you're not working hard. So people have these packed calendars and we don't have any time to be human with one another anymore. There's no water cooler time. That water cooler time is different. The fact that we all watch different things when we go home at night, you can't go to the water cooler and talk about last night's episode of Seinfeld. That we all, as a populace, kind of watch together at the same time. I think I know the answer to this as I'm asking the question, but like, does the ability to support well-being today in the workplace, those personal connections, require a much higher level of intentionality on the part of leaders these days?
Well, yes. And the interesting thing is that's true whether or not people are working remotely or if they're in the office most of the time. The thing that like just annoys me more than anything in light of what we're talking about are people who work remotely and then they come into the office and then they stay in their cubicles or in their office and take Zoom calls with the very people that are standing outside their office door.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so if you will take it one at a time here. If I'm a big fan of hybrid. I'm not a big fan for obvious reasons for everything that we're talking about. I think you can be very intentional, but it's really difficult to sustain the kind of camaraderie and connection and the Seinfeld conversations, which by the way matter tremendously because if you're telling me you like Seinfeld and I love Seinfeld, I'm bonding with you in an instant, right? If I don't have that conversation with you and it doesn't come out anywhere else, I don't have that connection with you. And so we have weaker ties. So when I come to you and I'm thinking, oh, I've got to work with him on this, I don't really know you very well. So I don't know where to start. I don't know how to integrate myself into you, right? But it's like, hey, last time we spoke, you were talking about Seinfeld. I just watched one last night. Instant rapport building. Now we get into work. It just greases the skids in a wonderful way. So I believe that working in the office gives us permission to work remotely. And so if people are working a couple days at home, have them focus on the things that they do and stop paying attention to people's calendars. Judge people on their productivity. Give them goals and hold them accountable for whatever it is they're responsible for. And if they have a clear calendar, it looks like they're not doing anything, doesn't matter. Judge them on outcomes. This is nonsense to be able to, because people are playing, you mentioned gamesmanship. This is massive gamesmanship that people are filling their calendars in anticipation that somebody's going to go, oh, well, look at Jim here. He's, slacking off here. Is he playing golf again? Like, so people do that, right? And it's like, just if you have a accountability for people and you just say, I used to tell people that work for me, I've ran bank branches, like large networks of bank branches. And I told my managers first took time when I got the job, I go, I don't care when you come in. I don't care when you go home. And the first person goes, we're a bank. We have to open up at a certain time. We have to close at a certain time. And I said, yeah, but it doesn't mean you have to be there. You've got a team. And they will, if I'm not there every day, I go, well, then you're going to lose the credibility of your team and you're not going to be able to stay as the leader. So you're going to have to balance that out. But I'm not going to tell you you need to be there every single day at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. You open the doors. Like, you don't want to control people like that. So managing people more humanely and respectfully with the accountability is the way you do it. But I would say if you are managing a highly remote team, like 4 or 5 days a week, you've got to create social events. Like you literally create them. Like everybody go out and get a cup of coffee and then go get a pizza, or you send them something. You send them $50 and say, use this week. We're going to have a call on Thursday. Go buy yourself ice cream sundae or whatever and have it delivered and we'll pay for it. Just so that people can have the Seinfeld conversation saying, oh, Jim, what's one thing we don't know about you that's gone on this week? And you can share whatever that story is. And then we can go to Jan and everybody's getting that and we're all learning from each other. This is a way to create connection. But if, let's say that people are working 3 days in the office, never let them take a Zoom call, unless you're talking to somebody in Europe that you can't be with, if people are in the office for a meeting, we're all in the room together and dedicate the same kind of social opportunities. Like just say from 3 to 5 today, I'm not judging you on anything. Just go spend time with people that you don't know. Go have a cup of coffee, tea, go have a beer. I don't care. Just go meet the people that you're working with because you can sense whether or not a team really has that cohesion, whether people, you can sense, you can walk in a room and you can see whether people are, looking at their phones or whether they're talking and playing grab ass and just having fun. That's what you want to get to because those are the teams that really perform.
Yeah, I love it. I know Jan wants to dig in on some stuff, but before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about our sponsor. And this is a company that really knows how to do it well. Darley. It's a family-owned business in the Midwest. They have been a trusted partner of the military and first responders for over a century. Think about that for a minute. Over a century. That's fantastic. From mission-critical defense equipment to innovative firefighting solutions, they ensure our heroes are equipped for success. Learn more about Darley's dedication to excellence at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Thanks, Jim. Hey, Mark, I feel like a little bit of a contrarian today, so forgive me. But, I'm just trying to kind of reflect, what I'm hearing and have heard for decades, really, in the workforce. I'm with you. I mean, personally, hey, get your job done. But I would also say the reality of the people running a vast majority of the businesses, it might not be in their corporate values on their website, but one of the number one values that's unspoken is work ethic. And like it or not, FaceTime matters. And, again, if you're a guy that's hybrid, guy or gal that's hybrid, or somebody that says, hey, I'll get my work done, I'm not going to work these crazy hours, I'm just going to get it done. That's fine and dandy, but you're not going to be an executive. You're not going to get promoted. You're not going to be on that list. And even when we say we want to create a flourishing team, if somebody, is a lot more like, let Jim, Jim always says personally, he goes, I'm lazy. I'll hit my sales quota in March and I'm done. That's fine. And again, if I've got a good relationship with Jim, great. But there could be 10 guys on the team that resent the hell out of Jim. Like, he isn't working. If he could do that in March, what could he do if he worked the whole year and worked his butt off? So to me, this is me being the contrarian. I think what you're saying about flourishing teams is contrary to the fact that a value in the work world right now is work ethic. It might not be talked about at the Gen Z level, but the boomers and the Xers running companies, it's really important.
It's always been important. I don't really know, honestly, anyone in any business that has an annual goal that they could meet in March and then go off and ski and lay at the beach and be able to say, put me down for 100% a goal and I'll see you back in January. Like, I don't, so I don't see that as being realistic. But what I will say is that if that were possible, then we're not really doing a very good job of assigning goals. You know what I mean? If it's consistent, if he goes out there and finds some one guy that decides he's going to buy $100 million worth of whatever your product is, and like, that's once in a lifetime, let the guy have his year off and come back the next year, but make sure your goals are aligned so that people are challenged. But I think the attitude is that we've always wanted work ethic. We've always rewarded people that worked hard. And in the environment where people are working remotely, what's happening now is companies are passively aggressively rewarding people who are in the office. And so if you're going to do it that way, tell people like, hey,
Mhm.
we're cool with you working from home, but if you don't want to grow in your career, if you don't want additional responsibility, then keep doing what you're doing. So in other words, people understand that they're making the sacrifice. What I have a hard time with is companies saying that they're hybrid and then punishing people that don't come in 5 days a week. That's duplicitous, in my opinion. And so let's earn some trust here and say, we're going to continue to do hybrid, and some of you do really well with it, and it's made some accommodations. But we think that if you're going to be a leader in our company, you really need to be here. You need to be
Yeah.
here. You need to be around. And so if you're willing to make that sacrifice, we're willing to reward it. If you don't want to make that sacrifice, you can still work here. There's nothing wrong with that. It's playing both sides of the fence that I have a hard time with.
Yeah.
The principal question is, we really want people to produce. And I was a sales manager in financial services at a very senior level for most of my career and was massively successful in getting people to perform at levels that no one else had ever in every business that I ever had. And it all came down to supporting the needs in people, so that deep human needs, that by supporting them, they could focus exclusively on getting their job done and doing it well. And so just telling people True North is out there, you got a goal to meet, we're going to be talking at the end of the quarter. The idea that you could just do that, that's not leadership. But if anybody who's ever tried to do that does it for very long, you're going to realize that there's a bell curve of performers. So you're going to go, well, there's the guy at the gym who's living in Hawaii now for the rest of the year because he sold massive amounts in one guy and he's done. And then you're going to have other people that came in right at 100% of goal. And then you're going to have a whole bunch of people that didn't come close. And I think that's the problem, is that if you want a team of people where everybody is producing, you can't lead in a way that just says productivity is the only thing that matters around here.
Yeah. And just to clarify, Jan is right. I have said that before. And I've said that before, but what he's not mentioning, and he knows because he knows the way I operate, is the remaining months of the year, I could spend time with so many different people, whether they were clients, employees, or prospects. And I could probably tell you where they went to college, what their favorite food is, what the names of their kids are, and all these other things, which are the kind of conversations that build that fabric that we need to make the work we're doing easier. And so, I'm tracking 100% with what you're saying, Mark, because, when I take a look at this, it's really, investing in people and the things they truly care about, the things you would do if you didn't need a paycheck, the people you care about if you didn't need a paycheck, that really allow you to move the needle and do amazing things and build trust and kind of enjoy what you do on a daily basis. Because if you're not enjoying it, it's just, every day's murder. And, I think both of these ideas can coexist as
Oh,
we
yeah,
go
yeah. Well,
forward.
I mean, we're being contrarian, so I'm giving you my contrarian feedback. Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's important because I think people think like this.
Yeah.
Like, why should I have to be concerned about this? Like, they get a paycheck, they get a job, my guy's got a new car. Why do I need to be worried about this? And I'm like, because if you want people to go from here to here, you're going to have to do something differently. And if you just want people performing, if you're just going to, basically allow people to operate and take whatever performance comes your way, and that gets you to the promised land, which it does often, managers can have 80% of their people not even coming close, but you've got 20% of people just killing it and they're carrying the team. And that's where the manager is spending all their time because those people are killing it. That's not leadership. That's luck. And it'll backfire on you at some point when things get really hard. But the other thing is, most people don't want to work for that guy. Most people don't want to work for somebody that, is just showing up every day, hoping that the people will just get their work done. This is for Jan, but I'll tell you a great story. So this was early in my career. I was managing about 30 bank branches for one of the largest banks in the country. And the number one performer, I inherited her, and she was like 3 years in a row, the number one manager in a 4,000 bank branch network, right? So she was doing great for me. And one day she came in, we had meetings with all 30 managers once a month. And she said, I would like to manage these meetings for you. And I said, manage the meetings? What are you talking about? And she goes, I just get a kick out of that. And what I would like to do is I'll get the agenda, I'll figure out who the guests are, bring food in, I'll organize all that. The meeting room will be set up, everything will be taken care of, and I'll work with you personally. So I'll get a little connection with you. And I was like, oh, geez. And she goes, you don't want to do it because you're afraid I'm not going to be number one anymore. And I go, you're right. It's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm thinking this is going to take up way too much of your time and not in a good way. And she said, if I promise you that I'll keep up what I'm doing and do this for you, will you let me do it? And I go, of course. I said, absolutely, I'll let you do it. I could have said, no, I'm not going to take that risk. So she did it. We did this for like 3 years. And then I got a big promotion and left. I mean, I was working, the company was based in Seattle. I'm spending a lot of time up there. I'm not seeing any of these people anymore. But she was in San Diego where I live. And I happened to run into her in some public event. And she goes, hey, I want to tell you a story. She goes, your peers tried to recruit me over and over and over to come into their region, which pissed me off, of course. Like, right? What are you doing? That's like, you don't do that. She said, oh, they were very subtle. We'll give you a bigger branch, or we're going to give you this team. We're going to give you these opportunities. And she said, I had to think about it because these were great opportunities. But you want to know why I stayed? Because you let me do your manager meetings. And I said, why? And she said, because it meant something to me. It meant something to me that you would let me do that. And I never even wanted to have to negotiate with those other managers to say, if I came over, would you let me do it? She goes, I got a thrill out of doing that. I felt connected to the people. So I just wanted you to know. And that locked it in for me. It's like finding ways to support people in ways that most leaders wouldn't think to do.
Yeah, that's
That's
awesome. I
awesome.
love
Yeah,
that
great
story.
story.
I am kind of curious though, because, I think for some of us, I think, like being just human with the people we work with and want to lead is maybe second nature, but I find maybe sometimes the biggest culprit in this whole mess is HR. Like, you know, they are sometimes just the worst about ignoring, like, the word human resources. They just completely like ignore the human part in sometimes. And like, we're kind of managing people, managing them in and out of the organization and all kinds of other stuff. And it's just like, why is it that we struggle when, like, you were in sales? Jan and I spent some time in sales, so we both know that like selling is a very emotional thing. How is it that like the one department sometimes that should be the most in touch with, our employees and the well-being of our employees is the one that helps us be less human than anywhere else? I mean, that's just
So
my
it's
personal
it's
opinion.
coincidental. I wrote an article. It's coming out January the 22nd. I don't know when this is going to be airing in Fast Company. And I'll give you the heads up that I'm probably going to take some flack, and almost certain that I will. But basically, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal before Christmas, and the person basically alleged that HR is sort of like the C-suite's executioner. It's like they don't have a seat at the table. This is what they implied. They didn't really state it. So I stated it in the article saying, this is the reputation that HR has had for a really long time. And I was a little bit upset about it in the sense that, you know, I had science that I introduced 15 years ago that I thought once people read it and understood it, that they would go, this is naturally the progression that we need. But you have to lead change. You have to tell people this is why we're going to be leading people differently. And this is why it's going to help you and it's going to help them. It's going to help the organization. And it didn't happen. And I blame HR because there was no courage there. But I think it's part of it is because the C-suite didn't give them teeth. They're like, blah, blah, blah. It's like they do the survey, the engagement surveys, and do nothing with it. They listen and don't act. This is the way that the Wall Street Journal put it. And I'm like, I'm on board with that. So what I said was, if you want to establish a new relationship, a reputation, if you will, if you want people to see HR as being anything other than a lapdog for whatever the C-suite says, hey, we've decided we're going to lay off 1,000 people, go do it. So they bring everybody in and they go, okay, we got to have our packets ready. We got to have our documents. We got to have our communication piece. Where is the person in the room going, why are we letting 1,000 people go? Is there another way that we might be able to do this? Could we do job freezes? Could we ask people if they want to take some time off? Any alternatives? It never happens. We're just seeing 18,000 people laid off at Google and all these companies. Like, nobody is looking for an alternative that I know can happen. And so I'm on board with you completely. I'm not critical of HR specifically. I'm critical of CEOs that don't understand that if you hold out HR as being the ambassador of people and you use them as a tool to harm people, that relationship isn't going to work very long. So you got to decide, I think what you should do is you should take legal and HR and completely make them separate. And HR should be the advocates in legal. If you want to be laying people off, let them do the contracts and let them do the, whatever that is that needs to be done so that HR can focus on the employee well-being aspects. Because I think it's critical and it's important and it drives revenue. We know all of that. But when you bring them together and you put HR under legal is going to go, well, you can't do that. We shouldn't be focusing on well-being because if I have to let them go, they're going to come back and they're going to sue us because we helped them. I'm making it up, but you get the idea. So they're taking the leadership for the people who've been trained to defend the organization instead of the people that should be out there advocating for people's. You can tell I'm kind of passionate about this and
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Mark, we're getting toward the end of our time with you, and I want to kind of do a little bit of a loop and connect what you were just saying. And I was saying to someone today, what really makes me kind of angry is when people don't have hard conversations and they wait until things are bad and there's a riff or a reduction in force or downsizing, and then they fire the poor performers. And I think it's a cowardly thing to do.
So do I.
And part of the problem is, I think when people have hard conversations, they don't know how to have hard conversations without micromanaging and not having these just human conversations about, hey, you said you're going to do this. You didn't do it. Let's talk about it. Instead, they just micromanage. They drive people out by just, like it's almost like prisoner of war tactics in some way. Again, quickly, if you could, guidance would you have for people about not micromanaging, having the difficult conversations, not taking the coward way out when people aren't performing?
It all comes down to one thing, which is that I believe that if you have 10 people working directly for you, you need to have 10 individual conversations every single week with those people so that you're checking in. So let's say you're the person that's not performing, Jan. So you and I are having a conversation. I go, hey, Jan, I'm really hoping that you can take care of this problem. I was talking to this client and they're really upset and it's in your world. So could you make sure that you take care of that? Next week, we have the conversation and I say, hey, how did it go? And you say, oh, I had those meetings last week and I was out with my kid and I'll get to it this week. I have an opportunity now to anticipate that there could be a problem next week. And so what I'm going to say to you is, okay, I'm very disappointed that you didn't get to them. This was a hot issue. And I must have failed to convey that to you. But you won't fail to convey it to you now. And so when this meeting is over, I need you to take care of that. And I need you to respond back to me just so that I know it's been taken care of. Did I hurt you by saying that? Are you going to look at me and say, well, that's unreasonable? If you took a week to get back to something that was important, I've solved the problem. You're back on good footing. You solved it. You came back to me. Sorry, Mark. I know I kind of dropped the ball on that, but it's taken care of. He's very happy. Have a great week. Our relationship is back on track. If we're not having those conversations, so if I see you in another 3 weeks and I go, where is it? I'm going to go, what the hell happened, Jan? And now I'm going to micromanage you. I'm not going to trust you. I'm going to go, I want this done tomorrow and I want this done on Thursday because I'm angry. The cadence of the meetings is what's
And the
important.
thing to solve for it, to me, what you're saying, it's easy, but it's a math problem. And the math problem is, what are you not going to do that you can make time to do these things with your people? Like, what are you not going to do that every interaction isn't just a status update?
But
That you're
the
actually
thing is
developing your people.
over time, they can become quicker conversations. They don't have to last forever. You just have to have them.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, we're about to wrap up. Any final words of wisdom or any singular recommendation we should walk away from today?
You guys were generous in sending me your questions in advance. And it's funny, on my podcast, I'm neurotic about, preparing, really understanding who I'm talking to and sending out the questions. But as a guest, and I've never liked it. And I like just having the conversation. But I did see the questions, and one of them was that you had a guest on who said that basically people are, mostly emotional, rarely rational. And that is the foundational idea of Lead from the Heart, is that Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, 300 years ago, and we believed it. And so we believed it so much that we said we want to bring leaders in who are strictly rational, always in their minds. Everything's data. I don't care about your emotions. I don't care how you feel. And what we know now is that up to 95% of human behavior is driven by feelings and emotions. So if you want to get to the core of what's going on with someone, don't ask them, what do you think about this? Ask them how they feel about it. That's going to
Yeah.
give much more accurate assessment.
Mark, this has been great. And the guest you're referring to, just for our audience, is Kwame Christian, is the guest who said humans are emotional creatures who are sometimes rational.
The science has proven this conclusively, and I
Yeah.
don't think most leaders understand that.
Yeah. Well, again, it's great having you on a second time. We really appreciate it. We'll try not to make it 8 years before the next time.
Thank you again. Lovely seeing you guys. Thanks for
Yeah,
the great conversation.
well, you're welcome. And for our audience, for everybody listening, that's all we have for you this week. We'll include ways for you to connect with Mark in our show notes, and make sure to visit us at theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, well-being is attained by little, and nevertheless is no little thing itself. Citium Zeno.
It's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.